DEWITT law.com. It can be something that you're dealing with, a friend is dealing with, or just something you've kind of been curious about from a legal perspective your whole life. You can send those questions in and we'll answer them. We'll have some fun with them here on the air. You can also always, of course, call the office at 1-800-DeWitt Law. That's 1-800-339-4885. Mo, how you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing good. Do you get caught up in the March Madness frenzy?
I haven't. I've heard a little bit about it.
So you don't fill out a bracket or anything? You never try?
I mean, I have in the past. I've watched in the past and paid more attention. And things seem to become a little more interesting when you have money on them.
Yes,
if you're gambling on them. Not that anyone here would do that.
No.
But no, I haven't really followed it in recent years.
See, I think that you should get back into if you ever find a bracket pool next year, you got to enter in because every year it's no one that knows basketball that wins.
Well, that's true. Yeah,
this year, my fiance won our bracket challenge. The name of her bracket was the Mascot Melee.
Okay.
To which she decided who the outcome based off who she thought would win in a fight between the two mascots.
I mean, I feel like she might be onto something here.
It's not a bad strategy, but she ended up winning. I think she won by a good amount of points too. So it was just a thought of mine that I was like, I know Mo's not a big sports guy, but I feel like he's the type of guy that would be able to win a bracket challenge if he had filled one out.
Well, if I based it on mascots, I mean, there's a reason the Magic have never won a championship, and that's because they have a friendly dragon as their mascot.
Whoa, easy there. We
love
a little more
Stuff.
vicious.
Stuff's a great guy. He's nice, but is he going to win championships? That's all I'm saying.
Yes, he will. I have faith in Stuff to lead us to a championship one day.
One day.
Who knows when that day will be?
Right.
But just know it will happen one day. Mo, let's go ahead and dive in here. Do you have a topic of the day for us? What do you got locked and loaded for the show today?
Nothing.
Okay,
No.
perfect. Here we go. So let's keep talking about Stuff the Magic Dragon. Have you noticed how his nostrils flare out sometimes when he's on the court?
He's very good at that. Very good at that. No, last week we talked about the alimony reform bill that passed in the legislature. And stay tuned because we will talk about that some more later in the show. But I wanted to talk about some of the other bills that did not pass in the Florida legislative session this year and talk about where they kind of stand at this point in time. So for people out there who don't know, Florida lawmakers had to do a 60-day, or excuse me, an extended session after their normal 60-day session to basically pass the budget. So they're working on a $112.1 billion spending proposal, and they're constitutionally required to get that passed to basically have a budget. That's the only time they're constitutionally required to extend the legislative session, which has happened. But there were some other high-profile bills that we talked about earlier in the year that kind of died on the floor, essentially. So, one of those was the bill related to the Surfside Tower collapse in Miami. And if you remember that,
yes, yeah.
the condo building that just completely collapsed, I think pretty much everybody was killed. I'm not sure that there was any survivors that I recall. And really brought under scrutiny, the maintenance requirements for condominium associations. I guess in this case, it had been well known that there was a lot of maintenance that needed to be done. They didn't want to pay for it. The structure was obviously degrading. And eventually the building just collapsed, which frankly is something we really don't see here ever. I mean, that's like a third world country. When you think of a building just collapsing like that, it doesn't happen. Right. So the Florida legislative,
unless it's like a super old historical building too, like even then they preserve those to a point that they don't really have anything bad happen.
Right. When they're historical, usually there's a preservation society overseeing it. They're kind of on top of that. They're making repairs to keep the building in place. In this case, you had just an old condominium building that was near the beach that was just being battered by the weather and wasn't being properly maintained. And ultimately, it cost a lot of people their lives. So there was a bill. Again, this bill did not pass, but they wanted to put a bill in place that would require all high-rise structures 30 years or older to undergo a structural inspection. If it's 25 years or older, the building's within 3 miles of the coast, then it would have to undergo a structural inspection and then be inspected every 10 years thereafter. So obviously, when you build a building, there's building codes and permits that have to be complied with. But once the building's up with these condominiums, there's really no ongoing inspection except for the association kind of policing themselves,
which clearly wasn't working in this case.
Well, and it becomes a problem when you have a financial issue because the association is the one who has to pay for these repairs. And if they don't have the money to do it, or they don't want to impose an assessment on the members of the association, basically saying that the members of the association have to pay thousands of dollars for these repairs to be made, they're stuck just not doing them. And frankly, I mean, it sounds like the building, and I haven't really followed the inspection that occurred after the building collapsed, but I think pretty clearly the building probably should have been condemned if it's in bad enough shape where it's
Right.
just collapsing. But that's the point of condemning a building, is it's not safe enough to be occupied. So here, it would take the self-policing away. If this bill were to pass, it would take the self-policing away from the associations and put these mandatory inspections in place. Inspections, start a little bit earlier if it's near the beach, if it's near the coastline, where you have more weather damage, erosion, things like that. So, unfortunately, that did not pass. It passed the Senate with 38-0. And it quickly passed. There was congratulatory remarks, and then it got sent over to the House, and it just died on the House floor. It never made it through. So
Was this another case of adding things in, or it's weird to see something go through the Senate so easily and then have it just die on the House floor, is it not?
I think it's more of a, in this case at least, it was more of a issue of priorities and timing. I think it just didn't have
Oh,
enough time in the
it
House.
just didn't get to it.
Right, exactly.
Oh, wow.
So it just died when they recessed later that evening in the House. It just never got through to a vote to even be considered.
Wow.
So it had great support in the Senate though, 38-0. No one was opposed to the bill. It was just a matter of getting it passed by the House. So I think we'll definitely see that bill next year come back up, and hopefully will probably be passed. To put those safeguards in places for other condominium associations throughout the state.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. That is something that I think would be, um, yeah, a common sense type of thing to have in place. It's especially when you're dealing with a condominium where people, like families, everyone's living, and you're taking the burden of making sure everything is right on yourself. But if you don't have the money, we see what kind of happens in those situations.
Yeah, you don't have the money, or you're not paying attention.
Yeah,
They're not hiring the structural engineers to come out and look
yeah,
at
or yeah,
things.
just being negligent on it.
They just think it's a water leak when really the main beam of the building is being eroded, or whatever may be happening. So yeah, it's probably a good measure to have those
And I'm
inspections.
sure, as is if you're somebody that owns a property like that, the last thing you're thinking, as we mentioned, is that it's just going to collapse in on itself.
Again, that's not something we really see in a first world country, is buildings just collapsing on their own. Now, the building boom on the Florida coast probably happened, what, 60, 70 years ago at this point. So a
Are you
lot of
asking?
those.
Are you asking me, or because I have no idea.
I thought you were a Florida historian. I expected you to know the answer to these questions.
I am 29 and from Rhode Island. But
Uh,
sure, yes, I agree. Yes,
Thank you.
it was 63 years ago to be exact.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for that information. But those buildings that were built along the coastline, that may still be there, are probably getting older, getting up in age,
Yeah.
where they do need to be maintained if they're going to continue to be occupied. So I think this is a measure to kind of help safeguard against some of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's something that, yeah, as you mentioned, will probably pop back up next year. And I mean, seeing as how well it did in the Senate, probably make its way through. Was there some more that bills?
Yeah, there's a few others I wanted to touch on. One that we mentioned previously, which was the sovereign immunity bill. If you remember, sovereign immunity is basically if you're injured, or if you sue a state entity, you're limited as to the amount that you can recover. Right now, it's $200,000 per person,
Oh
three
yes,
hundred
that's
thousand
right.
dollars
Yes,
per
yes.
accident. So the bill tried to raise the limits to $400,000 per person, $600,000 per accident. The sponsors that sought to they also sought to tie the future increases in the sovereign immunity to the consumer price index, meaning as the consumer price index increased,
That number would increase as well.
exactly. Local governments, of course, complained that they would not be able to afford the corresponding increases in their insurance premiums,
Right.
because at the end of the day, they still have insurance companies who are paying out on these policies under the sovereign immunity laws. So that one died. There was also one that didn't really hear much about, kind of an interesting bill, dealing with consumer data privacy, which has obviously been a very hot topic lately.
Yeah, you don't
Data
say.
breaches,
Yeah,
everything like that.
they're not fun.
Not fun at all. So there was a bill that was proposed that would have required businesses to obtain a consumer's permission before selling or sharing their personal information, and imposed a deadline for reviewing, correcting, or deleting their data. And it allowed a private cause of action for consumers to sue a business who failed to
Huh.
comply. So, if and this would apply to any business. I think it would really have pretty broad sweeping consequences if it passed.
Yeah.
Where any business that had any sort of consumer data, if they didn't comply with this, someone could sue them for failing to improperly sharing their information or
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Well, it
Uh,
sounds like even if they continue to pester you with emails and you had unsubscribed to a form of email and they kept going, that could even sounds like that might be something you could sue them for as well here.
well, possibly. And right now, I think there's a federal act that allows for a lawsuit for spam emails essentially
Yeah.
if they don't have the unsubscribe provision. This, I'd want to know some more details about this, frankly, but it definitely opens the door. If any company shares the information, if they have sister companies that they share the information with, when you give them your data, it really would allow for anybody to sue if that data ever got out there one way or another. Obviously, the bill was vehemently opposed by the state's largest business groups because they don't want to be sued over this, understandably. And whenever
And they've probably been collecting the data for a very long time already.
and probably selling the data for a very long time
That's also
already.
true. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And then how
It's a
does
two-way street.
yeah, I mean, and we've seen a lot of companies, Apple obviously changed their policy about sharing data,
Mhm.
and other, large corporations have changed their policies where they're no longer going to share it, but that doesn't give you a private right of action to sue them, obviously. So it's, critics warned on this bill that compliance would be prohibitive. I can't talk today. But basically that it would just cost companies too much money to comply with this bill, to put the safeguards in place. It would be a big, constraint on small businesses, especially who have to comply with this. The House actually approved the bill, though, 103-8 back on March 2nd, but it never made it to committee in the Senate, so it ultimately died there. So
Huh.
interesting that it had such. I was surprised to see it had that much approval in the
Yeah.
House, given kind of some of the concerns there and the compliance concerns that were in place. But ultimately, it did die. We'll see if that one gets brought back up next year or what they do with that. But kind of an interesting little topic there. Definitely a hot topic for the times.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk a little bit more about that too coming up here. We can dive back into that. And if you want to send a question to us about any one of those bills that didn't make it through or just a general legal question, again, you send those emails to ask@dewittlaw.com. That is ask@DEWITT law.com. Also, don't forget, check out the website, DeWittLaw.com. You can submit a case evaluation there. You can check out past archive shows. They got the legal blog. And don't forget, Facebook and YouTube at DeWitt Law Firm. You can catch the past shows there as well. We do put the video of those shows together so you can get a little video flavor involved. And if you miss some of the show or you don't get to finish it on the radio here today, you can go ahead back and listen to the end of it on YouTube or Facebook, just at the DeWitt Law Firm. We got plenty more show coming at you, too. You're listening to DeWitt Law Review on WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580.
My name is Garrett Curtis. I was driving to work on December 8th of 2020. It was nice and sunny out, and I was driving down O'Galley and Satellite Beach, and I was hit by a driver that was in the turn lane trying to turn in the opposite direction, and I sustained a knee injury. I picked up the phone and called Mo, who was actually in the Bahamas, and he pointed me in the right direction on what to do and who I needed to go see and get checked out by.
Mr. Garrett called us right after he was involved in an auto accident. In Garrett's case, he actually rear-ended the other party. 9 times out of 10, if you rear-end somebody, you're going to be found at fault for the accident, and we won't be able to do anything to help you. But at the DeWitt Law Firm, we always investigate thoroughly, and in this case, what we discovered is the other vehicle pulled in front of Mr. Curtis at the last minute, and Mr. Curtis had no choice but to make impact with that vehicle. At first, the insurance company told Mr. Garrett that he was 30% liable, but based on the investigation that we did and the facts that we were able to shed light on,
Ultimately got me $100,000, and they accepted 100% liability for their party. Just always remember, if you're injured on the go, just call Mo.
And welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review, WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. When you're going and looking up at DeWitt Law Firm on Facebook and YouTube. Don't forget to check out the Twitter and Instagram and TikTok as well. Mo does a lot of really fun social media stuff that you really got to check out to see. For instance, I am looking at an Evil Knievel outfit right now in his studio here, and I don't know what it's used for, but I imagine it's something good, and I imagine you could find it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or TikTok one of these days.
Well, one of these. That's my court outfit. Frankly, I don't know why you.
I didn't realize that.
Yes,
That's what you wear an Evil Knievel outfit to court.
in certain cases.
Do you drive through the doors on a motorbike or like same time? Is it all part of the show, or is it just the outfit?
Depends what message I'm trying to get across.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, maybe if you like fly in a plane with a banner attached to the back of it, that would help get that message across.
I could. Be a very interesting day in court. I think the deputies would haul me out pretty quickly.
If they can catch you, you'd be in a plane.
There you go.
Let's go back to this consumer data protection bill that had been put out there, because it is interesting, and I think a lot of people would be interested invested in kind of learning about why that wasn't able to go through. And again, I'm guessing they just kind of ran out of time on this one, or was this just they didn't end up having
it ran out of time. It never went to committee in the Senate. One thing that's kind of interesting, though, is that it imposes a deadline for deleting a person's data. So, for instance, if someone sends an email to your company,
mm-hmm.
and this is just an example that I'm making up, and then 6 months later they say, "I want you to delete all correspondences between me and you, and any data you have on me." You have a deadline to do that. Now, there could be other issues that arise down the road. Let's say then a year later that person sues you, and you no longer have any of that information that would exonerate you in the lawsuit.
Yeah.
So, and not to mention just small,
how do you put a footprint on when you get rid of somebody's info?
Right, and certain types of businesses have regulatory agencies that oversee them, that they have to comply with those regulations as far as how much data they have to keep for a certain period of time, what they're allowed to do with it, all those kinds of things. So I think it creates a lot of issues, but just in general, small businesses are not set up to, you'd basically have to hire a data company to manage your data for you at this point, to have compliance with this statute if it were to pass.
And the other thing that I was kind of thinking is, how do you even know? Like, how would you know if the company did delete your data in the way that they can't trace back when they deleted it? How do you know if they ever deleted it?
I'm sure there's some sort of compliance measure where they have to send some sort of certificate. But again, that's more work for the business to do. There's more, you basically have to have somebody who can
feel like there's ways around that. Like, not ways around it, but ways they could fudge and sneak some things with that.
I'm sure you could fudge it, but then then you're subjecting yourself to further lawsuits if you do. So that's always the issue with these kinds of provisions, is it really creates a lot of work for small businesses. It's prohibitive for them because they have to take, it's already hard enough to find employees. Now you have to find employees to do this, or you have to hire an outside company to oversee it for you. That costs more money. And of course, you're not making any money off of, monitoring your data, but now you're required to do so by law. And so, it would be pretty cost prohibitive. I see why the large business groups would certainly be opposed to it, but also it really would affect small businesses, in my opinion, more than large businesses. If a small business has to comply with this, because they just don't have the resources to do it. Most don't have in-house IT departments that could oversee.
No, and a lot of the
things.
small businesses that data that they take on is I think it's almost different than when the big businesses take it on a lot of the times, because the small businesses, especially local small businesses, they normally won't turn around and sell that information. That's just them to help build their small business. Whereas, when you give it to the larger businesses, they turn around and sell it as well. So the small business might be sitting here and be like, wait, like we rely on these kind of things to help grow our business because it's local. It's not a conglomerate in this sort of sense.
Right. But then you have the person who sends the notification to delete all data. And if they're not set up to comply with that, now they're facing lawsuits, essentially.
Well, and that's kind of the other prong that I thought of this as well, is that with this bill and the way that it is written, and it does introduce, feels like it introduces a lot of opportunities for people to start suing for, whatever they think is a breach of their data.
And there are certain areas of the law that we see where people are essentially lawsuit trolls, and they just people would in this case, for example, they would just contact your company and then contact you to delete it, and just do this on a mass scale to see who would not comply and then file lawsuits. I mean, you see this with patent trolls in federal court who file these ridiculous patents and then sue everybody. There's a number of other ones. I won't go into details, but there was one, and a friend of mine actually dealt with him, where he would what was it? He would just respond to ads on or ads for can't talk all of a sudden. Renting houses, essentially,
Okay, yes,
renting houses, apartments, things like that on Craigslist, and kind of small places where people who own like one or two houses, landlords who own a couple of houses would post, and he would phrase the email in such a sense where he would try to get it to violate the Fair Housing Act if you turned him down,
Right.
and then he would file a lawsuit and so on and so forth. So I mean, there's certain people who do try to take advantage of these laws, so you do have to kind of be careful of that as well, and make sure that it doesn't really open the door to kind of frivolous lawsuits like that.
Yeah, and that would be kind of one of my concerns. That was one of my thoughts exactly. That someone would try to find a loophole similar to that and just try to exploit that. We got plenty more show coming at you here. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review. If you want to send in a question, don't forget, hit us up, ask@dewittlaw.com. If you want to call the office, schedule an appointment, that's 1-800-DeWitt-Law, 1-800-339-4885. Latest news, weather, and traffic coming up. WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580. And welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review, WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. Don't forget, if you want to schedule an appointment with the DeWitt Law Firm, you got to give them a call at 1-800-DeWitt-Law. That is 1-800-339-4885. You can also always go to their website, DeWittLaw.com. You can submit case evaluations there. Also, check out some of the past archive shows. They got a legal blog, which is very interesting, help you get some more information outside of here on the show. It's really great. Check them out. And again, at DeWitt Law Firm on all of your social media platforms. Mo, we had a couple more bills that failed to make it through the House here, and we wanted to kind of dive in and talk about those here. What do we got?
Yeah, and I think it's just interesting to kind of know what's going on in the Florida legislature, what kinds of things are being proposed, and why they're being proposed.
And it's something, well, that you can keep an eye on next year as well. These are the bills that didn't make it through this year, and there's a chance you'll see pop up again next year.
Yeah, and a lot of these things relate to stuff we see in the news all the time. Like we talked about the Surfside collapse earlier.
Yeah.
Obviously, that was a huge news story, worldwide pretty much. But no one really covered, at least I haven't seen much coverage on this legislative reform to try to prevent it from happening in the past. So you do kind of see the legislature's response to some of these big stories when you follow these bills that go through, whether they pass or not. But like you said, a lot of these we'll probably see again next year, and with more time and maybe some reforms here and there, they may actually be passed in a future legislative session. So one of the other ones that we've seen a lot in the news is obviously property insurance reform. So right now we're out there where there's a lot of stories out there where we're seeing, people's insurance being canceled because their roof is 10 years old, cancellation letters being sent out, on a wide scale basis by these insurance companies, and a lot of insurance companies just pulling out of Florida altogether or going bankrupt. I think we covered a few shows ago, St. John's, I think filed bankruptcy in the state of Florida or pulled out of the state of Florida. And so they did propose a property insurance reform bill that sought to discourage meritless lawsuits by awarding attorney's fees to prevailing defendants in property insurance disputes. Excuse me. So right now, one of the big problems is if the insurance companies lose, they could be on the hook for the attorney's fees.
Right.
And so I think, as we've talked about before, these measures were kind of put in place after Hurricane Andrew, where the insurance companies were really giving people a hard time. People down in Miami who had a lot of hurricane damage from the storm. The insurance companies were just not paying out. So there, the legislature took action. They passed a reform bill that gave homeowners more rights when they sued insurance companies to try to get them to pay out without having to file a lawsuit. Well, the scales have kind of tipped now. And so, some lawmakers are now predicting that an insurance crisis is actually going to force a special session this year because this property insurance reform bill did not get passed. Again, they just kind of ran out of time on this one. But here, it would, of course, it would have the attorney's fees provision if the defendant prevailed, which is the insurance company. If they prevailed, they get attorney's fees. It would also have imposed a deductible for roof coverage, and had some other measures in there to try to limit these roofing claims and limit the amount that the insurance company is having to pay out on these roofing claims, so that hopefully insurance companies start coming back to Florida. But I know, on this station, they've been covering it. I've heard some of the stories where people are just receiving cancellation notices left and right from their
Yeah.
insurance
Oh,
companies.
yeah. It's been a problem.
Yeah, and I think last time we looked at it, Citizens Insurance was signing up 5,000 people in the state of Florida a week. And if you don't know, Citizens Insurance is this state-backed insurance company. It's, backed by the state of Florida because one of the reasons it exists is because we do have some insurance problems here in
Yep.
the state of Florida. Typically or historically, it has been because we're a coastal state, because we have hurricanes, we're on the coast. So there's a lot more liability associated with having properties on the coast, as we well know. Now we've seen kind of a second wave of insurance concerns with all these roofing claims. And so that's been going on for a number of years now. And frankly, I think the insurance companies, this is, I think, the second year that they lobbied for some legislative reform. It didn't get passed this year. There was a slight reform last year. And so they're fighting back at this point. And that's why we're seeing all these cancellation notices. That's why we're seeing them pull out of the state of Florida. They don't want to deal with it anymore. It's costing them too much money. And so if there's not, some sort of reform, it'll be interesting to see ultimately, how many insurance companies will be left besides Citizens.
Yeah. And that's what we're kind of looking at is all these notices going out. We had the St. John's one. I think there was another one that announced that they were leaving or leaving.
There's been a few.
And it's been constant in the news. And I don't know how that would. The problem with that bill is that then it kind of leaves the homeowners and people who need that insurance in a short spot. Like that's where I see the issue there, is that it's two sides who both are in need of something that neither wants to give up.
Well, I think it's always a pendulum effect. Something happens, it swings to one side, then it gets taken advantage of, it swings back to the other side, and it kind of slowly moves back and forth, and hopefully eventually gets into the middle. But yes, obviously when Hurricane Andrew came through, the insurance companies were being overly difficult. They passed legislative reform. Maybe the pendulum swung a little too far to that side. People figured out how to take advantage of it, and now it's going to go back the other way.
Okay. Yeah. So that'll be another one that I imagine will definitely pop up again next year. And then we have another.
There's one more, and I haven't heard much about this. It was a human trafficking reform bill, which is interesting, but didn't really hear much about it. Which would have raised the penalty for a first-time offense of purchasing sex to a felony. Customers, they call them customers, that was interesting, could also have their names placed on a statewide registry, be forced to perform 100 hours of community service, attend educational classes, and have their vehicle impounded. Repeat offenders could face a mandatory 10-day jail sentence. So really, it sounds like a bill dealing with prostitution, aimed at trying to help prevent human trafficking down the road. That one ultimately passed the House 141-1. One person voted against it, and then died on the Senate calendar, meaning they ran out of time for it. So
that's another one that, like the first one that we had talked about with the building inspections, that one feels like another one that's like, that probably should go down this route and go ahead and pass this one.
Yeah, again, just ran out of time. We'll probably see that one back in future legislative sessions. But something that human trafficking obviously has been in the news a lot more lately. I think there's a lot more awareness around it, and so obviously this is another legislative bill that's proposed in response to some of the awareness that's been brought to human trafficking.
Which is, it's been another like the insurance issue. There's been a lot of news about human trafficking recently, and this is something that I think has been needed to be dealt with for a while now. And I think that is it's a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just weren't aware of it before, frankly.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I remember when I was in law school, I think Bill McCollum came and spoke at the law school, and he was Attorney General of Florida at the time. And he said that, or he made a comment that up in the panhandle of Florida was, had the highest rate of human trafficking in the nation or something like that, which was very surprising. I had never even really heard of that or thought of that, but obviously a lot more awareness has come out since then.
Yeah, it's something that we need to bring the awareness to as well. Mo, what's next now? When is the next legislative session? Because it's not for we got to wait a whole year now for all this, right?
So we have a special session right now that's to deal with the budget.
Right.
They could try to hear other bills in that time. If they don't, or if the legislative session is not extended, some people are saying this the roofing claim or the property insurance reform issue
is going to have to be
could cause a special session to occur. I don't know that it will, but it could. So unless there's a special session that occurs, basically they meet again next year.
Yeah.
Start at the beginning of the year next year. Otherwise, Unless it's dealt with in a special session, it'll be a year before these things are addressed again.
Yeah, I could see that maybe just with hurricane season coming up now, right? That now it's kind of like, well, maybe we should deal with something with this insurance thing because we could have a season this year. Who knows?
Yeah, and it's putting it could potentially put a lot of strain on Citizens Insurance, the Florida-backed insurance
Yes.
company.
Yeah.
Because if everyone's switching over, which as we said, I think it was a rate of 5,000 new customers per week for Citizens, and a hurricane comes through, Citizens is the one who's going to have to pay all the claims,
Right.
which is going to be very expensive for them, obviously. Now, of course, they're taking premiums. It's not a free service by any means. But, typically insurance is a game of, diversifying your risk to a certain degree. And Citizens is a Florida-based insurance company. So it could put a big strain on them if there is a big storm that comes through while they have this, giant increase in customers.
Could they maybe put something together that would help Citizens out specifically? Like, is there something that could end up being brought together? Just because it doesn't seem like this is a issue that will be able to be solved in a special session. Like, this sounds like a bill that's going to have a lot of debate to it. So, is there maybe something they could do in that side of things, or is it just no? It's got to be this bill.
It may be a funding issue with Citizens. I'm
Right.
sure there's other ways that they could help Citizens, certainly, if it needed to be assisted in some way. I haven't heard that it needs to be at this time. But I think overall, they're really trying to figure out how do we bring insurance companies back to the state of Florida to insure the citizens of the state of Florida for their homeowners and other property claims. Because at this point, nobody wants to do it.
Right, and it's already a bit of a hassle, not a hassle, but it's already hard to get a insurance claim or insurance on a new house with a roof that is, 10 years old or more. Like they
Yeah.
really hesitant to do that sort of thing, and those are the cancellations that people are receiving.
Yeah.
If you've got a roof that's 15 years or older, really, I'm sure that those are the majority of where these things are going to.
Yeah, I heard basically any roof that's 10 years or older, a lot of insurance companies are just sending out cancellation letters.
Yeah.
They don't want to insure them anymore. They're too concerned that there's going to be a roofing claim made to replace the roof. And given how much roofs cost these days, they just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, it's a lot. It is a lot of money, and especially after the run on them with the previous issue with Andrew. So
Yeah.
we'll keep an eye on those bills for the next year, and also keep an eye on this special session to see what comes out of that. Mo, we'll come back here, and we've got your pro tip of the week as well. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review. Don't forget, you can give the office a call at 1-800-DEWITT-LAW. That is 1-800-339-4885. And check them out on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, social media, wherever it is, at DeWitt Law Firm. And maybe we'll get a sneak peek of an Evel Knievel costume coming in soon here. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review on WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580.
I was visiting a local resort when I had an unexpected slip and fall. I reached out to the DeWitt Law Firm and was put in contact with Philip Wayne. Initially, the insurance company offered me a lowball amount, and I was able to secure over 10 times that amount from Philip Wayne and the DeWitt Law Firm. I'd like to thank them for all their hard work and recommend them to anyone who's looking to have an attorney. If you're injured on the go, just call Mo.
Final segment of the DeWitt Law Review on WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. The number, if you want to call the DeWitt Law Firm, set up an appointment, is 1-800-DeWitt-Law. That is 1-800-339-4885. Also, don't forget, you can check them out online, DeWittLaw.com. That is DEWITTLAW.com. Well, Mo, rather than do a pro tip of the week, why don't we go ahead and update the alimony bill? Because I know that we do have something to give the people and talk about with that. So what's the latest there?
Well, I mentioned earlier in the show we would, provide you some information on that and give you an update. Basically, at this point in time, the bill still is on the governor's desk. We don't know if he will veto it or not. If it goes into effect, it will go into effect July 1st. But just to kind of remind people what the bill looks like, is it does eliminate permanent alimony. And it has a formula for the length and the amount of alimony. So under this formula, if you were married between 3 and 10 years, the alimony will last half the length of the marriage. So at a 10-year marriage, it would be 5 years. Between 10 and 20 years, it would be 60% of the length of the marriage. So if you had a 20-year marriage, they would be looking at 12 years of alimony. And if it's 20 years or longer, it's 75% of the length of the marriage. So we have now a strict formula as far as the length goes. And then as far as the amount goes, it says reasonable needs or 34% of the difference in net incomes, whichever is less. So, it
Ugh.
does leave some.
I was told there would be no math.
That's what they told me when I went to law school too, but clearly they lied. So it does leave some room for interpretation where it says reasonable needs. So obviously that's not a strict mathematical formula,
Right.
but 34% of the difference in the net incomes is what it provides for on the math part of it, essentially. Obviously, if the reasonable needs are less, then they can take less than 34%, but that is what the new bill says. Will be interesting to see if the governor actually allows it to go through. As we talked about before, it has two provisions, which Governor Rick Scott vetoed both times: the 50-50 presumption for time sharing, which caused him to veto it, and the retroactive provision on permanent alimony, which also caused Governor Scott to veto it. So we'll see what Governor DeSantis does with it. Ultimately, hopefully, we'll probably know here in the next couple of months.
Yeah, and so I'm just curious, what in your mind do you think people could kind of classify as reasonable needs?
Well, so when you do we may not have time for a full explanation here, but basically, when you do a divorce, you have a financial affidavit and you show whether you have a surplus or a deficit. So, for instance, if the actual need on a monthly basis was $1,000 a month, let's just say for round numbers, but 34% of the net difference was $2,000. Well, this bill says whichever is less, so you'd be limited to the $1,000 because that's what your needs are.
Right.
So the actual difference in net income is more than that. So you wouldn't get that, basically, is what they're allowing for. So if you don't really live a lavish lifestyle, if you have a very simple lifestyle, and your needs aren't very high, then you're still limited by your needs. Because right now, alimony is based on need and ability to pay.
Right.
So, what is one party's need? What is the other party's ability to pay? And that's how they calculate it. So that's kind of still the reasonable need standard. This adds a second component with the difference in net income.
Okay, I get that. And then I find that reasonable needs is such an interesting way to phrase it and how they can be manipulated, because there's reasonable needs and then it seems like reasonable wants in some cases.
Well, that's the key is, what's reasonable, and ultimately there'll be case law that helps flush that out and define that further, if the statute is passed. Now, I will tell you, selfishly, I've finished a book on divorce and I'm holding it for publication at this point. It's been completely finished for a couple months, but I can't release it yet because I don't know if this is going to go into effect or not. So I have to wait to see if he vetoes it or not, because if he doesn't, I have to rewrite the alimony chapter, because obviously that's now changed.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
We're going to have to stand by for that. That's
Yeah.
a nice little nugget to drop at the end of the show. Mo, I don't know. I can't think of something quick on the fly. You've been listening to the DeWitt Law Review. Appreciate everyone tuning in and joining us here on this Sunday. We'll be back same time, same place next week for Mo DeWitt. I'm Chris Crawford. Don't forget, you can give the office a call at 1-800-DeWitt-Law. That is 1-800-339-4885. We'll be back same time, same place next week on WDBO 107.3 FM and AM 580.
Oh, hey there. I was just staring at this check that we just got for $20,000 for a guy who was hit by a car while riding on his one wheel. The initial offer in this case was just over $3,700. That's well over 6 times the initial offer. And that's why you call Mo.